Our current lesson series is entitled Navigating the Grief Process. Navigating the Grief Process. Again, just to give due credit, it's based largely on 4 chapters in Diane's book, and but it's not the same. I'm taking the Bible stories and a lot of her illustrations out of there, but it's roughly the same. But it's not. I'm not reading her book. Just separate lesson. So far, we've talked about the 5 stages of grief, and you can see those on screen. I don't need to read them off to you again. And we will just kind of keep this loosely in mind tonight as we move through our present discussion. Tonight's lesson is entitled Trusting God During the Grief Journey, in 5 critical areas based on the book of Ruth. But first, I want to ask if any of you that is at least my age, if you're younger than me, probably not, any of you remember an English band by the name of Kinks, Kinks, 1960s? Oh, we do. Okay. Well, I had never heard of them until today. You're not that old, Monica, are you? You can't. I never heard of the Kinks till today, but of course I never listened to the Beatles either. I was just straight country music, Johnny Cash, guys like that. But I was from Hicksville, so I wasn't into the popular stuff. So this first I heard of them was today because I was thinking about the fact that I grew up living in a house on a dead-end street. Anybody else live on a house on a dead-end street? Now today that's cul-de-sac. Well, I never heard of a cul-de-sac. I didn't know what a cul-de-sac was until I moved to North Carolina and we bought a house in a little subdivision down here. We lived on a dead-end street. It didn't have a nice little circle where you could, circle and go back out either. And I remember having to tell people that were coming for the first time to our house and getting ready to leave, and we'd always have to say, don't go this way. It's a dead end. You got to go back the way you came. A dead-end street doesn't give you any options. Well, it just so happens that Kinks, the pop band, in 1966 recorded a song called Dead End Street. So I thought, well, wonder what's going on there. So I checked it out, written by Ray Davies. Now, I don't even know the historical background of this, but on Wikipedia it says that the lyrics are about a couple who want to immigrate from England to Australia under what was called the Assisted Passage Migration Scheme, whatever that was, some legislation, I suppose. But the whole thing fell through. They couldn't go, and they couldn't find work, and they were in bad shape financially in England. And this band liked to write about people that were lower class, out of work, disadvantaged people. So they wrote this song, Dead End Street. Now, like I said, a dead end street doesn't give you any options. Really, you've come to the end. The only thing you can do is retrace your steps. Well, I discovered all this a little too late to actually put them on video for you, so I'll just have to sing it for you tonight. No, I'm just kidding. That would be a dead end street too. But here's verse 1. It doesn't even sound poetic to me, but here it is. There's a crack up in the ceiling, and the kitchen sink is leaking. Out of work, got no money, a Sunday joint of bread and honey. I have no idea what that means. And here's another line. What are we living for? 2-roomed apartment on the 2nd floor. No money coming in. The rent collector's knocking, trying to get in. We are strictly second class, and we don't understand. And here's the chorus. Dead end. Why should we be on a dead end street? Dead end. People are living on a dead end street. Dead end. I'm going to die on a dead end street. I think you get the point. Now, here's the thing now. If I can make this connection. When you lose somebody that you love, there's no way that you're going to see them again in this life. Now, we have hope beyond this life as Christians. We will see them again, those that know the Lord. So, but in this world, everything seems like a dead-end street at that point. The best I can describe it from my own personal experience, and it's not been losing a husband or a wife or anything like that. So, but I've known a lot of people, and I've heard their expressions and their words, and people tend to feel like their life's over. It can't go on. It's a dead-end street. But I'm here tonight to tell you it's not a dead-end street. And Ruth and Naomi discovered that, and we're going to look at the book of Ruth tonight. By the way, the song Dead End Street was quite popular, got the number 5 on the singles chart in England and number 73 in America. I have no idea why anybody would want to listen to it, but you might want the rest of the story. So we have to trust God that we're not on a dead-end street when something such as a terrific loss occurs. It's going to feel that way, and you can't deny that. And quite frankly, you're not going to change that feeling for quite some time, probably. But it is important to understand that if God has left you here, you have a purpose and He has a plan for your life, and you've got to start over. You've got to, you can't go on the way you were. You've got to turn around and see what God has for you when you go that direction He has mapped out for you. So, trusting God during the grief journey in 5 critical areas of life. And we're going to look at the book of Ruth tonight. And Ruth has 4 chapters. And I'm not going to put 4 chapters on the screen. So I hope you have an app on your phone or a Bible if you are unfamiliar with the story. But if you don't, you can go home and read Ruth and then come back and watch the video. It'll make a little bit more sense to you. So let's get started. The first area of life we have to trust God for during this time period in our life is comfort. Trusting God for comfort. When somebody has suffered a loss, there is no immediate and no effective comfort that can give you relief, but there is comfort to be had as you work through those stages. And there's comfort along the way, maybe immediately in some small ways. It doesn't mean that there's comfort in 100% of your life, but for an instant, for a moment, or through one individual or another, or one means of another, there is comfort. Let's look at Ruth and Naomi's situation. Naomi is the mother, Ruth is the daughter-in-law. Here's the story. Now, it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. Now, the book of Judges just precedes the book of Ruth. And obviously, they're close together in the Old Testament because they're in the same time period. The book of Ruth doesn't say which of the many judges covered in the book of Judges that Abimelech and other, I think that was her husband's name. Her husband, if that's not the name, is close to it. Elimelech, I think it is. It doesn't say which of the judges they might have lived under, but it was a time when there was a famine in the land. Now, a famine in an agricultural society, such as it was in those days, is a pretty serious matter. Now, it says, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. Now, there's a problem with that. Moab, the nation, the country of Moab, is east of the Dead Sea. It's not all that far as a crow flies from Bethlehem, but where they were from, but a pretty long journey as they would have to travel. And Moab, the people that settled Moab, were descendants of the daughters of Lot. You go back to Genesis, pick up the story of Lot. And they, of course, survived uh, the Holocaust, if you will, the fire and brimstone that fell on Sodom and Gomorrah, and then it goes on from there. But the Moabites were not Israelites. They were not of Abraham. And they, even during the period of Judges, they oppressed Israel, attacked Israel, and subjugated Israel at times. It's not a place you'd think that somebody from Israel would want to go or would go, but he did. It was not a good choice. Verse 2, the name of the man was Elimelech, the name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. Epaphrodites, I should say, of Bethlehem. Epaphra was another name for Bethlehem. It was called both. And that, of course, was in Judah. And they went to the country of Moab and remained there. Now, we know they were there for at least 10 years because Mahlon and Chilion married Moabite women. And they were both married, maybe one of the two, at least. It spanned 10 years on some behalf. The Israelites were told in the law not to marry foreign women. So that was a huge mistake. And a lot of Bible interpreters, and it's probably not wrong, is that there was some element here of a lack of faith in Elimelech's life and a lack of obedience maybe in the sons. But that's what the situation was. Whether or not that is why they died, we don't know. Some sermons or commentaries may suggest they were out of the will of God. God was chastising them. God caused them to die because of this. There's nothing in the text that says that. It could be, but we don't know. Moving on to verse 3. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. Okay? But she still had two sons and two daughters-in-law. And she was left with her two sons. Verse 4. Now they took wives of the women of Moab. We already learned that, but this is the old Hebrew way of working through a historical passage. They give you a summary at the beginning, and then they go back and give you the details. Now they took wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died. So the woman survived her two sons and her husband. Now, that left her in a really bad situation. Her husband and sons, I mean, I don't know if they bought land in Moab. I don't know that they would have been allowed to. Maybe they were working for somebody in Moab, working that land for a share. We don't know. But whatever it was, she just lost all of her income when she lost these three. No means of support. And there's no means of support like there would have been back in Israel. She is, in a real fix. So something has to be done. Extreme grief, horrific loss, not only of her husband and her sons, but of her livelihood, her security, her safety, everything. If that isn't a dead-end street, I don't know what would be, right? Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab, people would travel back and forth, caravans and such, for she had heard that in the country of Moab, that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. So the famine was over. Could have been over for a while, but she knew about it. Verse 15, and she said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back. Now, I'm skipping a part that I need to fill in here, so let me do that. When they first left, let me just back up the screen. When they left to go home because they heard that, there was grain and the famine was over, both Orpah and Ruth went with her. They felt under obligation to go with her. I don't know if that was their custom. I don't know if it's they didn't want to go back home. I don't know. It seems like for Orpah, it probably was something she felt she was obligated to do. So, verse 6, then we're skipping all that where they leave, and then along the way, Ruth realizes, although there's nothing for me in Moab, there's nothing to benefit them staying with me. I'm not going to have more sons. Now, that is a reference to the Old Testament law of levirate marriage, which will come into play in this book in just a few moments. So in verse 15, and she said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back. That's after she said, you just need to go home. That's your best bet. Orpah, who initially went with her, went back. Now she's addressing Ruth, who stayed. And she said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Don't miss that. Because going back, being in Moab, meant you worshiped those false gods. But Ruth says, or Naomi says to her, return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, and this is a very famous couple of verses here, entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you, for wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. That's what Ruth said, the Moabite. She makes a choice that evidently Orpah didn't make in terms of faith in Yahweh, the God of Israel, the one true God, the Creator God. So she is making a choice not only out of obligation and love for Naomi, but a choice in terms of her faith in God. And she continues in verse 17, where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do, again, she references the God of Israel. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. This is a very well-known couple of verses I mentioned. It's even used in some marriage ceremonies, wedding ceremonies. That's not really the context here, but it is in terms of commitment. So, comfort. Ruth was Naomi's comfort. For what Ruth said here, to know that she is so loved and that Ruth is a believer in her God and he wants to go with her and be with her. I mean, think about how bad it would have been for Naomi to be all by herself. She wouldn't have any children, maybe no extended family to speak of, no husband, nobody else. She would have been totally alone. No one to give her any comfort. And Ruth herself is suffering and grieving. But sometimes, it's not that there's a person over here that's, not in grief and one over here that is. It has to be that equation for comfort. Comfort can be something as simple as listening, weeping with those who weep and weeping with each other. But Naomi has that comfort, and Ruth has that comfort because of their love for each other and their presence. Remember 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 2 and 3 says that God is the God of all comfort, and he comforts us so that we may comfort others. So comfort, to a large degree, comes from other people and the right people, and Ruth was the right person for Naomi, and Naomi was the right person for Ruth to provide that comfort. God provides comfort in multiple ways. For example, Hebrews 13:2 says, do not forget to entertain strangers, for by doing so, some have unwittingly entertained angels. Angels bring comfort. Angels brought comfort to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, or an angel did. So another person might not necessarily be a person. I mean, that sounds a little far-fetched if you've never entertained that thought before, but it's certainly a reality. In Acts 12, angels came and had to wake Peter up, poke him to get him awake, and he was trying to get a good nap on that bare floor of the cell, chained, but got him out. Angels are there to be our helpers, and God can use angels, but he doesn't necessarily reveal when he's using an angel. And I would suggest there's probably been times in every one of our lives where an angel's assisted us, and we're just unaware of it. Maybe in the form of a person, maybe not, but that's their job. Besides people and angels, the scripture says in Romans 15:4 that the scriptures bring us comfort. He refers to the comfort of the scriptures. So just reading the Bible, but then again, when you read the Bible, the Holy Spirit, who is called our comforter in the New Testament, helps us understand and apply the Bible. So the Holy Spirit is also a comforter. There's many ways we receive comfort, but the most real and tangible way that we will feel comfort is through another individual. So we need to be vulnerable enough to let people know where we're at emotionally so they can comfort us. We need to be focused on comforting other people. So trusting God for comfort. And number 2, trusting God to meet needs. Now we're going to whiz through this. There's several needs, 3 of them actually we're going to look at. The first one is the need for, well, here they are, trusting God to meet needs. I listed them all for you. Direction, protection, and provision. God provided all 3 of those for Ruth and Naomi. Let's begin with direction. Verse 6 of chapter 1. Going backtracking a little bit from where we were just at, but then again, as we read before, then she arose with her daughter-in-laws that she might return from the country of Moab. For she heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. Verse 7 says, therefore she went out from the place she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And they were from Bethlehem, so specifically Bethlehem. Dropping down to verse 22, it says, so Naomi returned. This is another one of those summary verses. The details follow, some precede. So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law with her, who returned from the country of Moab. Now they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. 2 things here. She didn't have anywhere else to go. There's no other country, no other place on planet Earth where she could have had any help with where she came from. So she literally turned around from what had become a dead-end street and went home. It was the only logical place to go. It was the only logical decision to make. But God presented her with the circumstances that led to her coming home, and that's important for her and for the nation of Israel in the end. We'll get there. She returns at the beginning of the barley harvest. Not only did she return, not only did God give her direction, but she returned at the exact right time to have what she needed. But we're getting into the provision part. We'll come to that. Let's continue with the direction. Chapter 2, verse 1, there was a relative of Naomi's husband, a man of great wealth of the family of Elimelech. His name was Boaz. Now, someone asked me just before we started recording tonight if I knew that Boaz was a ruthless man in his younger years. And so I said to Robbie, how do you know that? And he just started laughing. Ruthless man. Okay. Thank you, Robbie, for your contributions. Verse 2, so Ruth and the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him whose side I may find favor. Because it's the barley harvest, and they're out harvesting the barley in the fields. It preceded the wheat harvest, and they would cut it with something like a sickle. They would bind it upright like this, binding around it, so they had sheaves. And they would just then drop them in the field, I suppose, after they were bound up, and others come along picking them up. I think we all probably understand how that worked. But as any farmer is farming to make a living will do, there will be some left behind. I've seen this, and I've thought about Ruth gleaning many times as I've seen here in North Carolina, sweet potatoes being harvested and people going into the fields and picking up sweet potatoes that were left behind. It's that same process. Now, this was actually a part of the Old Testament law that gave people that were poor the right to do that. They were not supposed to be prohibited from doing it in those days. So Ruth says, we got to eat. So, where do I go? Well, go out. She goes out and just picks a field, any field. Then she left and went and gleaned in the field of the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech, which we just found out. She didn't know where she was going, but God knew where she was going. God was giving her direction in a sovereign manner. Now, behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered him, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his servant, who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" So Boaz immediately knows this is Ruth. Now, she was new. There were other women working in the fields. The men had a part. They would cut it. They would do their part. The women would, help gather it and so forth. They were called his women or whatever. It doesn't mean he was married to them or anything. They were servants of some sort. But he notices Ruth right off. She was new, but it probably was a little bit more than that in the eyes of Boaz, who wasn't married. So this too is of the Lord. So after finding out who she was from the servant, the man who was in charge of the servants, then Boaz said to Ruth, "Will you listen, my daughter?" So now we're moving from direction to protection, the second of those needs. Then Boaz said, "Will you listen, my daughter? My daughter, will you not?" You will listen, my daughter, will you not? Question. You're going to listen to me. "Do not glean in another field, nor go from here, but stay close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. I have commanded the young men not to touch you, and when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn." Protection. Protection. Now, God protects us all the time through his sovereign intervention into this life, and we often don't really even know sometimes when he does protect us. But sometimes, I don't know about you, when I was about 17, I had a car accident, the circumstances of which the people that even saw it thought, there's no chance of survival. I walked away, a little scratch on my leg. And the car should have rolled multiple times down over a huge, it was really a fill on an interstate where they'd fill between two. But anyway, that accident was the beginning of getting my life turned around, because I wasn't serving the Lord. I was saved, but I wasn't serving the Lord. I was serving myself in those days. And the Lord spared me, and I knew that he did, and that was to begin a process where the Lord really changed my life. We've all probably could think of something like that, but even if not, God in a sovereign way protects us, and we just don't, sense it maybe at times. Remember Elisha's servant, 2 Kings 6:17? Elisha and his servant are in a city, and they're surrounded by the Syrian army, and they think there's no way out of this, and they're trying to leave town, do what God wanted them to do. And the servant says, "What are we going to do?" And Elisha calls upon the Lord to open his eyes, and he looks up and he sees multitude of horses and fiery chariots between them and the enemy. Angelic individuals probably riding in those chariots. So, but he couldn't see it. And often we can't see it, but it doesn't mean God doesn't protect us. So we've had direction, protection, also provision. Verse 14 of chapter 2. Now Boaz said to her at mealtime, "Come here and eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar." So she sat down beside the reapers. He was providing food for the reapers who were his servants. She had no right to it other than he just gave it to her. And then he gave her parched grain. She ate, was satisfied. She kept some back because she's trying to, make sure she can take some home for Naomi. And then Boaz goes even further. When she rose up to glean, Boaz commanded the young men, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves." The sheaves were harvested and taken away before the gleaners came in and picked up what grain they could. He says, "Let her go among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And let grain from the bundles fall purposely for her." Not only let her go among the sheaves, but, drop her out some extra along the way. Also let grain from the bundles fall purposely for her. Leave it that she may glean, and do not rebuke her. Verse 17, so she gleaned in the field until evening, and beat out what she had gleaned. You had to remove the seeds from the husks. They beat the stalks to get the seed, and it was about an ephah of barley. An ephah is a dry measure they used in those days. It's less than a bushel, maybe about a third of a bushel, if my memory is right, but it's not a lot. But that's pure grain, so more than you might think. Verse 18, and she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, so she brought out and gave to her what she had kept back after. She gave her mother-in-law what she gleaned plus what she kept back from lunch. God's providing for her. I'm thinking of two cases in the Old Testament, both in the same chapter. 1 Kings chapter 17. Elijah is fleeing Ahab and his wife Jezebel after the confrontation with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. And he's out in the eastern wilderness. He has nothing to eat, nothing to drink. So God sends him to a particular place where he had fresh water to drink. He still had nothing to eat. And God then brought Elijah bread and meat by ravens. That's pretty extraordinary for a raven, a scavenger, not to eat meat, but to bring it to somebody. That is of the Lord. You understand that. In the same chapter, God sends him, the next place God sends Elijah is to the house of a widow, and there's a famine in the land. So where those ravens got the bread, I don't know, but he gets to this widow's house, and she's willing to give what she has, but she only has a small measure of grain and a little bit of oil, and it's just her and her son. She really doesn't have enough to share, but she does, and Elijah tells her, "Your grain and oil will not give out until there's rain," and so forth. And it didn't. So God can and does provide. And when someone loses a husband, for example, and sometimes even a wife, you lose a huge portion of your income. There's security issues, all kinds of things, the need for protection as well as provision. Your life doesn't have any direction. All these things are needs, but God can be trusted with them. Moving on, number 3, trusting God for hope. We're going to go back to back to Ruth 1:19-23. This is a little bit before what we just well, it's actually a little bit after, right after where we just we're just at. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where have you gleaned today? You brought back all this grain and such. Where have you gleaned? And where did you work? Blessed be the one who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and said, "The man's name with whom I work today is Boaz." Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "Blessed be he of the Lord, who has not forgotten his kindness to the living and the dead." Elimelech, Mahlon, Chilion. And Naomi said to her, "This man is a relation of ours, one of our close relatives." Again, God's sovereign provision. But he's already given provision. God's already provided direction. But look at the hope that they gained from this. Just moving on to the next two verses. Ruth the Moabitess said, "He also said to me, you shall stay close to your young men until they have finished all my harvest." That's the whole harvest period. Not only she had all these privileges in the gleaning, she's to stay for the whole harvest. So this is an ongoing process. Verse 22, and Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, and that people do not meet you in any other field." So she stayed close. Why is that? Prevent gossip. She's just trying, to find a husband or whatever, perhaps. But more importantly, that she shows some loyalty to Boaz for all that he's done. So she stayed close by the young women of Boaz to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, which followed the barley harvest. This is quite some period of time. And she dwelt with her mother-in-law. So we're talking here about hope. What was that hope? The hope was, and this is clicking in Naomi's mind already, he's not just a close relative, but remember, the levirate law of the Old Testament said that if a brother died, an unmarried brother next in line should marry his wife, and the first son that was born would be recognized as the firstborn of the son that had died. It seems really strange to us in our culture, but it's the way it was. And I'm not going to go into it, and we just need to understand that. So Naomi is thinking, maybe the Lord's not only given us all these other things, but he's providing a husband for Ruth. And that was hope. Now, hope, when you read it on the page, we think hope means, well, I hope it don't rain tomorrow. I got to go out and do this and such. That's a maybe. Biblical hope is there's no maybe to it. Biblical hope we need to understand as assurance. She had gained assurance. Now, maybe that's kind of a process, but she was sensing what God had already done for them, and she could see it unfolding, and her hope is building. And that's what's happening here. She was seeing God at work in the situation. That's what gave her hope. It's not blind trust that we have to, dwell with. Now, obviously, sometimes we can't see God at work yet, and we might call that blind trust, but then that's built on maybe a previous time when we trusted God and God took care of us. So the more we see God work in these situations in life and experience it, we're able to have that kind of assurance. Number 4, we need to trust God for family. For family. Chapter 3, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you?" This is after the wheat harvest. She's not gleaning anymore. She's at home. All this time in Boaz's field, all this, whatever interaction there was. And then when it's all over, Naomi says, it's time for us to request that Boaz do his part according to the law and marry you. That's what this is all about. Seek security for you, that it may be well with you. Now we're going to drop down 11 verses. We don't have time to go through all this. But in verses 11 to 13, it says, "And now, my daughter, do not fear." This is Boaz talking to her. But let me fill in a little details. After Naomi said we need to do this, she instructs her to go to where the wheat was being what's the right word? God, the word just suddenly escapes me. Threshing. Yeah, he was threshing wheat late at night, and he would stay with the wheat all night till it was put in its proper place for protecting it and guarding it. And Ruth sends her there, and this is often misunderstood, but she tells her to go in and lay down at his feet after he goes to sleep. Well, that laying down at his feet suggested servitude and humility, and there was nothing unseemly about this in their culture. It was understood. But there's a risk that others would maybe misinterpret that, seeing her come from the place where the wheat was threshed, in the early morning. That's why in the text you'll find he sends her back home before daylight. But anyway, he wakes up, and here's what he says to her. And now he understood what it meant. He understood what the request was. And now, my daughter, do not fear. Here's his response. Do not fear. I will do for you all that you request, for all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman. Now, it is true that I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Stay this night, and in the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative to you, good, let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty for you. As the Lord lives, lie down until morning. So he basically says yes. The other closer relative said no. They made that official legally in their way. We're not going to go into that. So God provides family for Ruth, but also for Naomi. How's that? We're going to see that in a minute. The last thing, number 5, we got to trust God's ultimate plan for our life. When we have a loss, it sounds like we're blaming God for it. We're not. It's just simply recognizing God knew this was going to happen. God has his plans. And as long as we're still here, we're still kicking, God has a plan that we need to move forward with. It doesn't mean we have to be able to completely, get rid of grief before we can do that. No, we do and follow God's plan as best we can in the midst of it, and over time. Ruth chapter 4, verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he went into her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Whose son was it? Ruth's first husband, Chilion. Legally, he was the first son born after the levirate marriage. Legally, that son was considered to be the son of the previous brother or close relative. Now, it doesn't mean that Boaz wasn't his father. It doesn't mean that anything more than a legal sense. And there's much ramifications to that. Moving on to verse 17. Not just that, though. Also, the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, "There is a son born to Naomi." Why would they say that? He wasn't born to Naomi. Ruth's the one who was the mother. It's a son born to Naomi because that son legally was recognized to be the son of Naomi's son. Again, the same thing. And they called his name Obed. Don't miss this. He, Obed, that little boy, he is the father of Jesse. And who was Jesse the father of? David. And David was not only king, not at this time, they didn't have kings, in the period of the judges, but David was become the second king in Israel after Saul. And God promised to David that a descendant of his would sit on the throne of Israel forever. That's Jesus Christ. We'll find out more about that this fall when we talk about some prophetic matters. That's a pretty significant ultimate plan, don't you think? Now, ours probably won't be nearly that significant, but it doesn't mean our situation and God's plan for us is not significant. It is. And we have to trust him in that regard. Now, I want to leave you with something I just want to read to you. It's from an author by the name of David Seamands. Listen to this. Speaking of God here, capital H, he is already around the corner to meet me, so I can enter the future unafraid. For nothing can come to me that cannot be used by the grace of God for the glory of God, my own growth, and the good of others. The plan of God will unfold. And I think that is the ultimate object of our trust in God. So I hope that this brings you some comfort tonight, those of you that have had losses recently, and for all of us to keep in mind, because we're all going to be touched by this, unless the rapture occurs tomorrow, and I hope it does, or even tonight. But other than that, we're all going to be experiencing this, and God will be there for us.